Hi, everybody. Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is our last week for March. We're reading Frostbitten by Rebecca Zanetti. It's in her
We
Depop
sure are.
series.
If you
So fun.
missed the first two, they were on YouTube. So go look them up.
Yes. And in our story highlights, you can find the link and in our bio as well. So we pick up, and Millie is making breakfast after helping JT and Alex set everything off with their charters for the day. She's thinking about this new side of Scott that she saw the night before and how much intrigue it adds to how much she already was intrigued by him and is clearly falling for him. And she knows it's a bad idea, but she can't help it. Um, and a black SUV pulls up, just like deja vu for her. And so she goes out guns blazing this time and
Well,
turns
not
it's her
blazing, but she
team.
does have a gun in her.
It's her team.
Her
Or part of it at least.
mhm.
Wolfe, who is my favorite character from this entire series. I always love seeing him. And Brigid, who is the team member she actually called. And then the British twins, Ian and Oliver, who popped in, I think, in the last book and used to be MI6, and now they're kind of like working with her team. Um, and then her brother walks up, and she's mentioned before that she would be worried about JT and Wolfe being in the same room at the same time. Like, she doesn't know how it would go.
I mean, they're both
Uh,
grumpy and big and like
and
the same
bossy.
the same kind of yeah.
Yes. And
But
she's
no,
very
those
worried
two.
their personalities wouldn't mesh. Like, it would just be like a like heads butting constantly. And she's like, ugh, I don't have time to deal with this, basically. So she kind of steps in between them. And turns out they are already BFFs,
Yeah.
which she had no idea about. But Wolf, being his very wolfy self, once he decided to like adopt her as a sister, he called her real brother, and they went out fishing one day and talked, and like they're great. So she's
He's
like,
like, I know
oh,
everything about him, he knows everything about me. We are
we're
both
good.
dedicated to being brothers to you. Like, all right,
Yes. Oh my God, so funny.
good to know.
He's great. So they kind of strategize next steps and how they're going to split up all these things that they still need to figure out. Which includes like talking to a few more witnesses, some of which are like the women who accused Clay in college of assault. And so Millie, Scott, and Wolf head to Charleston to talk to one of those women. Um, and she says that she's not the one who actually reported it. It was her roommate who reported for her. And she retracted it at the time because she didn't remember anything. She was like a big partier at that time, so she found it plausible that she drank too much and passed out and didn't
Well, she said
remember.
that the campus police was, like, not she was a senior at the time. The
Yeah.
campus police was, like, being how they can be, I guess, how police
Yeah.
can be with sexual assault cases,
Yep.
and she was like, "It was embarrassing, and it was more trouble than it was worth, and I was about to leave anyway," so she withdrew the
Mhm.
complaint, but also, like, in the meantime, has done therapy, has done
Right.
and they asked, like,
Work
"So,
through it.
but actually, do you believe that you were drugged?" And she was like, "Looking back, yeah."
Yeah.
But at the time,
I
it
wasn't
just
sure. And
well,
he
she
said
was like,
no.
"You
His
could," with the
roommate
way they were
backs him up.
asking. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
nothing for her to
And
nothing
so
for her
she
to say
does
for
tell
sure.
Millie, though, that one of Clay's roommates in college was Rupert Skinner, the slimy prosecuting attorney.
Yeah.
And that is information that they did not know before. So then she and Scott go talk to the girlfriend of one of the three guys who tried to kill them. Um, they're on their way there, and the chief calls to say that the gas station in town finally called him back, and they do have security tapes for that night, but they're literal
VHS.
VHS tapes.
She says that they have VHS tapes, and Scott's like, what did he say?"
Right? He's like, "Do you have a way to play them?" And the chief is like, "Yeah, but I have to take them to my house because I have a VCR, but, like, we don't have one at the station or anything."
Also, they because also Millie was just kind of like, "Are we sure that it even has the day in question?"
Right.
Because a lot of times people just tape over that
Re-record.
or record
Mhm.
over, and he says, "Yes, however, when they were gathering the tapes, they did drop them So they're like in
And they're not
no
labeled,
one
so
knows what order they're in.
right,
So he's like, it is gonna take me some time to
to
go
dig
through
through.
everything.
So they do meet with the girlfriend, Nancy, who is 19 and very pregnant. And she tells them that whoever hired her boyfriend paid cash, but she didn't know who it was. Scott gives
She
her
says he didn't like her asking questions, and then kinda, like, rubs at a bruise or something, and it's
on her
like,
face.
"Oh,
Yeah.
no."
And they're like, "Oh God." And so Scott, of course, is like, "Well, she's better off." And I'm like, "Yeah." And Millie's like, "Yeah, I'm sure she doesn't see it that way." But Scott gives her the name of this group he works with sometimes who helps unwed mothers find jobs and stuff like that. And he also tells her she can keep the money that they got, like, to hire her boyfriend, which is not like, if the cops knew about it, she wouldn't be able to keep it, but he's like, "I don't give a shit," and she clearly needs it, so, like, fine. Um,
Also, like, I think in his head, he's like, "Well, the police didn't figure out like, they didn't
right.
figure out that she has it, I'm not gonna be the
I'm
one that tells
right,
her
exactly. I'm
to."
not volunteering it. So back at the house, Valerie is there waiting to pick up Alex and take him to his kids' baseball tryouts. She tells Millie that she's not sure why, but June lied before when she said that she had never hooked up with Clay. They talked this so this goes back to a little bit earlier scene where the four of them talked about the women that Clay had hooked up with, and Valerie at one point was like, "Didn't he hit on you?" And June was like, "I mean, yeah, but ew. Like, I've been your friend since we were kids. I would never date him." Like, and so at this point, Valerie is like, "She lied. Like, I know for a fact she's left the bar with him a couple times in the last few months." Like, they might not have been, like, dating, but, like, they
They hooked
had
up,
a
yeah.
thing. Yeah. And so this really surprises Millie, but also makes her sad because she's like, she clearly felt like she couldn't tell me this, and that sucks. Like, I guess I haven't been a very good friend.
Yeah.
Um,
It is interesting because Millie does not like, her reaction is very much like, "What did I do to
yeah,
make this situation happen?" Which
right.
it's interesting because it like, she could have definitely taken it as a betrayal, but she was just kind
Yeah.
of like, "I need to spend more time with my friend." Clearly, she's very lonely if she's over here dating this guy,
Right. Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
really kind of an interesting response.
Yeah. And so the team has dinner together and decompresses with a movie night. And later on that night, Millie's phone ringing wakes her up, and it's June in a panic because a bunch of emergency vehicles had just passed her house headed toward the chief's house. And they're like the only two people that live on this like country road. And so she doesn't know what's going on. And so Scott and Millie head over there. Turns out someone has shot the chief twice and started a fire at his place, and also the VHS tapes are gone.
Yeah. And they find out about the VHS tapes kind of after the fact because, well, first, like, Chief needs to go to the hospital,
Right.
then they're trying to get that fire under control, and it's
Yeah.
like everybody's there.
Yeah.
So somebody, I think Scott is someone with the chief, like, because someone shot
Right.
him, and they're like, "Yep,
Yeah.
2 officers are there." Everyone the rest of them are all at the
All
house.
there.
And
Mhm.
Scott I think it's Scott who thinks to ask, like, "Did he bring
The tapes
anything
home.
home?" Also, they ask if he's working on any other cases, and it's like, not really,
Yeah. It's pretty
it's
much
like
just this one.
Millie's case and some, shoplifting something, so it's
Right.
like,
And that just happened
clearly
like that day or whatever. So it's not, they haven't really dug into it much yet. Yeah. So that's clearly to do with this case. And then when the other cop comes out and says there's no tapes, like they know that that's what this was all about. Somebody took the tapes.
yeah, and to
Um,
burn the entire house down and shoot the chief
the
just to
chief of
get that
police. Yeah. So as they're headed home, Wolf calls to say he can't find Cat, which is his cat. He's very worried because Cat always comes back. Like, he's free to roam around, but he always comes back. But he's like, but he doesn't know these woods. Like, there's animals out here he might not be familiar
He's
with.
like,
Like,
"Why
I'm
is she
worried.
doing?" Yeah,
And so as soon as they get home, they all go out searching for Cat, but they don't find him. Scott and Millie decide the next day to go see Clay's, or I guess later that morning, to go see Clay's youngest brother in Richmond. He's in college there. And Glenn is his name. And Glenn remembers Millie from when he was a little kid because he's much younger. So when she was dating his brother in high school, they would like go to his
he was
soccer
little.
games and like hang out with him. And he thought they were cool, so he remembers
Yeah.
her fondly. Um, and so she asks him if he thinks it's possible that Clay could have drugged her. And
He's like,
he's like, actually, yes. Um,
absolutely.
he says that a couple years before, Clay got real drunk one night and alluded to drugs and using them um to have sex with women.
Like, he basically told his brother that he had a foolproof way for
Yeah,
him to, like,
to
get
get any
laid if
woman
he
he wants,
wanted it, and
basically.
he was like, "No, thanks." But
No.
also, yeah,
Yeah.
he's
And he
like,
also says that when they were growing up, if they wanted to hide something from their parents, they wouldn't hide it in the house. They would hide it in a tree outside the house that they could see from the house. That was like a thing that they all four boys did when they were growing up. So on the way home, they pull over so Scott can take a work call, and he is getting really being really tough on whoever's on the phone, and it's like turning her on. um and as soon as he hangs up, they're like all over each other. And so he kind of cools it off. Like he gets her off, but then he's like, hold that thought, basically, like puts her
yeah.
back in her
He's like,
seat.
"We'll finish this later."
Right. And so then they head to Dirth's office, and they're not sure if he's gonna like let them in or not, but they want to try to talk to him. Um, and on the
They
way
do think
there,
yes, because
yeah,
he is such a, like, he's so
braggart.
cocky and such a,
Mhm.
like, jerk that they're like, "He probably yes, but
Right.
we'll
But he
see."
might say no, and if he does, we can't go in. Because he has like a lot of security. It's a big office. And so on the way there, though, her phone rings with the like Darth Vader theme song. And it's the team leader, Angus Force, who is calling, and he is pissed that nobody has called him and told him what's going on. And she's like, "You're in Europe at a conference. Like, you literally can't do anything." And he's like, "I don't give a shit. Like, you are part of my team. Somebody should have freaking called me."
He is very much like, "I'm not your like, I'm not on your I
Right.
was
And
working for
he's
other
like,
people,
"You
like,
are
we're
on
not."
my team, damn it.
And yeah,
And so are you, Scott. Like, get over it.
yes.
You're on my team."
He is like, "I need to call some people to,
Yeah.
like, reinforce this idea that you because clearly you are mistaken and
Yes.
confused about where you belong." But he
So
also it's very it's funny because Millie is her first response is to be like, "I am so sorry. I did not mean to pull anybody. Like what happened is
away
that
from
the
their
other
job.
people left like their job, but also like took vacation and like they have like taken a leave basically because they
To
weren't
help her.
allowed to officially go."
Yeah.
And so she's like, "I am so sorry. Like I was not trying to do.
I
I
didn't know
didn't
they were
even call
taking
these
vacation
people."
time. Yeah.
And he's like, "That's not why I'm mad. I'm mad because you didn't tell us and didn't ask for help. And
Yeah.
what is wrong with you?" And she's just like, "Oh, well,
Yes.
also I'm
It's very
sorry."
cute.
But
Um,
it's like heartwarming.
it
I
is.
mean,
It's
I
very
want
sweet.
someone to like ream me out because I didn't ask for help
Right.
enough.
Because
It's
they
like,
love
but that,
me and they're concerned, and I
yeah,
didn't call and tell them what was happening. Yeah.
that was
So
great.
they go to see Dirth, and he does let them in, and they basically accuse him of trying to kill them, like with the hit squad. And he says he doesn't want them dead. He wants her to suffer, basically. Um he has decided that she is his enemy and he wants her to suffer. They
Yeah.
also ask him where his wife is, and he swears he doesn't know. And then he's like, "You should ask your mom because they're thick as thieves." And he's like, okay." And so he kind of ruminates on that for a while.
But
Um,
like during the conversation, it is
yeah,
very like antagonistic. So he says the
yeah,
thing and Scott and Millie are both kind of like, yeah, okay, well,
yeah,
that's not a thing. And then they like
right,
continue, but
yeah. So they head home and they stop at the hospital to check on the chief, but he is still in a coma. And then they decide to sneak into Clay's cabin, which is still a crime scene, and just see if there's anything for them to find there. Um, and so they go inside to kind of sit down where he would
they
normally sit and
on
see,
because they
like,
were looking for drug. They were like, maybe he has drugs. Like if he
right,
drugs people routinely, maybe he
he
has
has them
drugs in his
somewhere.
house.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's kind of
Well,
what
and
they're
then
looking
after
for.
what the brother said, they sit down in his like easy chair basically and kind of look around at his property and figure out like what tree would be like the one he can see the best from his house. And then they go out there. There's like 4, I think, that they have to choose from. They go out there and they're kind of like messing around to see if they can find anything. And they do find a metal lockbox, which they're about to get in the car and take home when his brothers intercept them again.
Clay's brothers,
And
yeah.
Millie has finally had enough of their bullshit. And she's like, "You guys, like, are you for real? Like, you've known me since I was a little kid. I did not fucking kill your brother. Like, get a grip." And like, I didn't. Like, what in the hell are you doing? And they both basically just like break down crying and like kind of apologize to her. And they're obviously angry that their brother's dead. They're obviously feeling guilty that they couldn't protect him. They're feeling mad that they don't know who did it, and they were clearly taking all that out on her, but it was a lot. And so she promises them she's gonna find who did it. Like, that's what she's been doing this whole time. And so when they get home, Scott and Millie are very amped up after this encounter, and they basically fuck it out, which is hot. And then later she finds
It's
Wolf.
also very, like, interesting because they're like, "We don't even know there's all these people in the house now," and he's
Uh-huh.
like, "Well, you're just gonna have to be very quiet," and I
Yeah,
was just like, "Oh, no."
yeah. It's super hot. Super hot. So she goes out later and she finds Wolf sitting on the porch, and he's still like distraught over not being able to find Cat.
So, basically,
And
he had been out the whole time, like,
Mhm.
all the time that they've been looking for stuff and talking to people and fighting with people, he's been out looking for Cat, and
Yeah,
he came home, but is going out again.
yeah. And
Um,
he's like, "I'm about to have a kid and I can't even keep my cat safe. Like, what? This is terrible." You know what I mean? Like, that's how he's equating it in his mind. And she's like, "No, like, no, 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 no. That is not the same thing at all. Like, this is not your fault." And so she kind of
It
talks
is very kind of
him
cute
down.
too because he's like, "You're
Yeah.
not you're good you're gonna be a great dad. Look how
Yeah.
you are with your wife. You take care of her, but
Yeah.
you don't, like, force her to stay, like, chained to you or whatever." And he's like,
Right.
"Well, I do have a team watching over her 24/7, but
While
that's
she's
neither
visiting
here
her
nor there."
sisters in California. Oh my god, it's so funny. He's the
It was
best. I
cute.
love him so much. And she's like, "No, you're definitely gonna be a great dad." And he talks about the compound where the team all lives. There's like this couple miles of land. I forget how they come by it, like in one of the earlier books. But at this point, they've all pretty much built a house in like a cul-de-sac, and they all kind of live in this like compound together. And because so many people have tried to kill them, and they put so many people in jail like over the course of these books, that like, it's safer for them to be like more protected.
Well, he also is like, Millie, I need you to help me make booby traps that are child safe." She's like, "I'm on
He's
it."
like, "On it." Yeah, totally. And he's like, "And oh, by the way, one of the lots in the compound is for you." And that shocks her because again, she hasn't really seen herself as like part of this team, but clearly they all see her that way. Um, and she's even more shocked at how much she likes the idea of living there with all of them, which is not something that she
Mhm.
thought she would want. And so she heads to bed and Scott
He
comes
said
down.
something about a wedding too. We do have
Oh
to,
yeah.
because he says, like, "It'd be nice to have a wedding. We're not gonna have one yet because my wife wants, like, his, fiancé wants to wait until after the baby and whatever."
Yeah.
And Millie's like, "I understand that," but he's like, "Nudge, nudge."
The funniest
We
thing too is because the way Wolf thinks is very interesting, and you see that throughout the books, but he starts it off like, "So, does Scott have a lot of friends?" And she's like, "I mean, yeah, he plays football, he's friends with, the detective Bianchi, whatever." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I play with them sometimes too." He's like, "I think it'd be
we
fun to
play
be
poker.
a groomsman and like I don't like so, put in a word for me," basically. It's so cute. Like it
He's like, she's like, "He has a group he plays poker with sometimes." "Yep, yep, I've done
Yeah,
that."
I'm part of that too, yeah. So he's, like, figuring out where he is in the hierarchy, like, if he's actually gonna get invited to be in the wedding, it's very cute. The wedding that is not as far as he knows, not happening yet.
They
So yeah,
have, as far as they know, they have still been like,
this isn't gonna
"Bad
work.
idea." Yeah. But anyway, it's very funny because
It's very cute.
it's good to know now because of what
Yeah,
comes later when Scott comes out.
yeah. He comes
He
out, and he knows he's not gonna sleep well because of everything that happened that day, and so he volunteers to go back out with Wolf and look for the cat. and she goes to bed. Um, and he also calls
And
his
that they're
mom.
watching, then Wolfe is like, are you like, Millie said that I was gonna be your groomsman at your wedding, and he's
He's
like
like,
Scott
did
like
she
trips.
now?
He's like, what? He's not upset, but he is like,
No,
what?
he's surprised. Yeah, it's very cute. And so while they're walking, he calls his mom because he's been ruminating on what Dirth said, like, "Why don't you call your mom? Like, I bet she knows something." And so he calls his mom, and, she reluctantly confirms that his missing client is actually with her in Nantucket. She's fine. Like, the husband had come over that day and, like, screamed at her and, like, thrown a vase or something, and I still wasn't clear on whether he cut himself doing that or whether he, like, hurt her, but either way, something got bloody on
He
the front
freaked her
porch, and
out
she was
enough
like,
that she
"I'm
was
out." And so and they kinda love that her being, like, missing is, like, making him squirm a little bit, so they haven't volunteered information about where she is yet. But now he knows she's safe, and so that's, like, one less thing on his plate. Um, and so in the morning, they break into the metal box, and they find several vials of liquid that they assume could be, like, GHB or similar, and a bunch of VHS tapes going back years, including videos of him that are
and they're not
labeled with the
VH
names
they're
of the
like
women who accused him in college.
yeah, they're not they're the little ones from a recorder, from like a from uh from like the cameras. So they were like,
Oh,
we need to have they were like, does anybody have a thing that could play this?
yeah.
And Millie happens to have like she does have some because she used the components to do other things.
Yep.
So she
Make her
goes to
gadgets.
grab she goes to grab one, which
Mhm.
is really convenient because those are not like that's not a
Yeah.
easy to come by.
And of course, nobody really wants to watch the videos because they think they already know what's on them, and they're right.
Yeah.
Um, and the biggest surprise, though, is that in the one that they watched, there's another person in the room with him, and it is Skinner, the prosecutor. So his
Yeah.
slimy ass has been involved in this up to his neck since college. Um, so they, of course,
And
call
so
and
they
report
watched
all
the
that.
first one not all the way through. They watched the first one until it becomes clear that like, oh no,
That's
we're
what's
not,
happening. Yeah.
and then they decide that they need to just like catalog the rest of them before they hand it over to anybody
Yeah.
because they need to like have a record of what all they had.
Yes. And so Millie has to get ready for this baby shower for Verna. And June has been calling her and begging her to meet up and talk, but she knows that she needs to have a bigger conversation with June about their friendship and why she felt like she couldn't talk to her about Clay and all that. And she just hasn't had the bandwidth for that yet. So she's been kind of dodging her calls. Um, but June texts and is like, listen, can you meet me early at the shower? Like, I need to tell you something. And so she's like, okay. And they all get the news that the prosecutor has been arrested based on what they found in the tapes. And so that's one more piece off the chessboard, basically. And Scott says he's going to take her to the shower and he's just going to wait in the car. Like he's not comfortable like dropping her off on her own because obviously they think people are still trying to kill them. So Millie goes in and only Verna, the pregnant one, is there. And she says that her husband, she gets a phone call and she says her husband found the cat. Um, and so they're gonna go get Cat. And so they go to leave, and out the back door, I guess this twins have like a houses next to each other with like a path in between or whatever. So they go out to go that way. And Millie looks in the kitchen and sees June unconscious and bleeding on the floor of the kitchen. And then she turns around and Verna has a gun on her.
Then, yeah.
And she is shocked,
Yeah.
as was
Because
I.
when she first walks in and she's like, "Where's June?" And she's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like
Or she said she went with my sister to get more champagne, and then she kinda notices there's already 3 bottles of champagne there, and she's like, "How much are we gonna drink?" And she's like, "Oh, I don't know, I don't get to drink any of it," like, so, yeah, it's all very, like, weird.
we should mention too that like during this whole thing, she's been very like, I'm a mother and I am pregnant, and she like touches her belly a lot and whatever. And not that that means anything, except that like at this moment when she's like has the gun, it's like, wait,
You're like, "Wow,
what
I
just
was not
happened?
expecting that." Yeah. So she forces, Millie to go outside, and Scott is kind of noticing things are too quiet, like, nobody else has shown up for the party, like, he can't hear anybody, and he's like has a bad feeling. And so he goes to check on them and he hears voices outside around back. And so he goes around there and he sees
And
what's happening.
he's immediately like, "If she went out without telling me," like,
Yeah.
he's just like,
He said
"Mm-mm."
she should have said she would stay in the house. Yeah. And then he sees what's happening and he kind of pops out and Verna is like, "I'm sorry, but you're in my way." And she shoots him. And he's trying to get up, but he can't. He's like fuzzy in the head and he hears a boat take off.
Yeah.
And he like forces himself up enough to like crawl back to his car and get his phone and he calls Wolfe and is like, "We need help." And then he passes out. So Verna takes her to this boathouse, which I guess is owned by Verna and her husband. And she admits that June was going to tell Millie that it was actually Verna this whole time who had been hooking up with Clay, not June. She
Yeah.
told her twin it was June, so that there was like a lot of misdirection going on with the info that was getting to Millie, but it was actually Verna the whole time. She is pregnant with Clay's baby, which is
She
another whole thing.
also, like, the things that she's saying, you're like, "Something is off with you," because she's
Yeah,
like,
big
"This is the
time.
heir to the cl to and we're going to when we make it to the White House," and you're like, "What are you talking
Like,
about?"
he's dead,
But
he's not making it anywhere now.
but
Yeah,
also he, like, even from before, he wasn't, like he hadn't even like, when they had interviewed the brothers, they
mhm,
said that he had potential, but that he hadn't even
right, he
started,
hadn't
he
even
was just, like,
started.
enjoying himself doing his thing where he was, so it's
Yeah,
like, I don't know what was happening in her
no,
head,
delusions
but
of grandeur,
she
for
had
sure.
a whole other, like, story happening
Yeah,
than what
it was
was in real
crazy,
life.
and so they walk into the boathouse and Kat is there. Verna has also kidnapped the cat as a way to
But
lure Millie
also the
there.
girl from the girl that was the pregnant girlfriend of one of the people
One of the
that
hitmen.
yes, that tried to kill him earlier, is also there, and she's just like, "Are you a part of this?" And she's like, "Look, I don't know what is happening."
She's like, "I'll give
Like,
the damn money back. I just wanna be done with this." And so apparently Verna had called her and said that, she was gonna call the police about the money unless she came to help her, and so she got rooked into coming over there.
and she's
Um,
telling her that she needs to go clean up the bodies at her house, and she's just like,
and she's
"What?"
like, "You're
No.
crazy, like, I'm not part of this. Like, you can have the money back. I don't care, like, I'm leaving." And so and meanwhile, she's having her, like, villain monologue. She's, like, telling Millie everything that's been going on, and she knew about him drugging women and sexually assaulting them, but he had promised to stop his little hobby before they got
Yeah,
married
she said
or
they were
whatever.
gonna find him a new hobby so
And
while
she's
they
like,
were
"Oh my god, you
together.
knew about it? You're crazy as hell." And so then but that night, Verna saw him drug Millie's drink and put her in his truck. So she lied about the fact that Millie got into the truck on her own. She was already basically passing out at that point. He had to like shove her up into the truck, but everything else she said, like she did see him do that, but he saw her, Verna,
Like,
and
they
just
made
kept
eye
going.
contact,
And
and
she
yeah.
was like, "Oh hell no."
So
And so
she
yeah.
followed them, and that was what was
On the tapes,
on
her
the
following them
tapes.
home. And she confronted him, and he said, basically anything she offered him, he didn't care. He was gonna do what he was gonna do to Millie. And so she said she basically had like a rage blackout and stabbed him to death. The knife she had stolen previously because she thought she was gonna be able to sell it or something, and then it just turned out that it was lucky that, she could frame Millie because it was her knife.
I don't know.
Um
I don't believe this lady, like, at all. She's bananas.
And
But
she turns out she's the witness for the prosecution who claims that she saw Clay and her kissing that night and arguing that night, and that was, like, how she was gonna settle everything off, being like, you know, that Millie was the one responsible because she saw them together. Um, and so she is clearly fully insane. Like, none of these things are making any sense, and like you said, everything that was, like, her plan about her, like, great big beautiful life she was gonna have with this man who was supposedly gonna be governor one day, like, he's literally dead. So, like, none of this is for anything now. Even if that was a viable plan in the beginning, like, it sure as hell not gonna happen now.
no, and he
Um,
wasn't like, he clearly wasn't as invested in her as she was
no,
in him.
not
But,
at
yeah,
all.
she basically stabbed him to death, and then like and Millie was already passed out, so she like stripped Millie and
Uh-huh.
like threw her in the bed with him,
Mhm.
and
And the knife.
then just stepped back and waited to see what happened. But
Yep. And
it
now she's about to kill Millie. And so Millie's like, I don't understand. Like, you already had me like in the crosshairs for murder. Why did you try to kill me? And she's like, well, I don't know how those drugs work long term. Like, you saw me arguing with him. Like, you were still awake. And I didn't know if eventually you would remember that. And so it was just going to be easier if you were dead, basically. And so she's about to kill Millie, and Kat jumps on her face and attacks her, and Millie knocks her over, and like the gun goes off. So
then
then we're
we switch to
outside with the team who hears the gun go off, and Scott is freaking the F out. They rush in. Wolfe subdues Verna. Millie rushes for Scott.
and Verna immediately, like when they come, she's like, "Oh, the baby, I'm so innocent," and it's like, "What
She's like, don't
is
even.
happening?"
Like, don't even try it, bitch. Like, you're cooked. So Millie rushes for Scott, who professes his love for her, and he says, like, I know it's a weird time to say it, but we people keep shooting at us. He says. And she's like, I love you too. And so they all head to the hospital. And 3 days later, she's at her hearing to try to keep her job. And Angus Force, the head of the deep ops team, walks in mid tirade of Rutherford, who's still a piece of crap. And the entire team and all their spouses and everybody comes in, and he basically lets the tribunal know, like, if you fire her, we're literally all leaving. Like, you get all of us or you get none of us. Like, that's it. And she's horrified because she's like, oh my God, no, like, no, you guys can't walk away from your job for me. Like, that's not what I
Yeah,
want. And he's like, too bad. Like, we're a
like
package.
it's done deal. Yeah.
And so the tribunal, I don't know how seriously they take him, even though if they knew him, they would know he's dead ass serious. But they basically did say that all these offenses that are supposedly against her should be like a reprimand in her file, but like it's not enough to fire her anyway. Like that was already the conclusion they had sort of come to, like before he.
Well, the one lady,
Yes.
but the guy who was doing his time, I mean,
Yes,
he was
Rutherford.
like, "You are the worst, and everything is
Yeah.
terrible, and you ruined everything." And it was like,
Yeah.
actually, Brigid found whatever information you needed. The like
And the
your case
FBI's
is
already arrested him.
fixed,
Yeah, so
and
they got Dearth in the end because of what Bridget was able to find out with her computer sleuthing, and they turned it all over the FBI to arrest the guy so that they didn't even have to deal with anybody in the higher ups of their own agency because they were all on the skids at the moment. Um, and so he also wants Millie permanently transferred to his team. Um, and so yeah, so that's all settled.
And then
And
as they're
they
leaving, he tells Scott, like, "We could use a lawyer,"
yeah, like, if
and
you want a job too, like, let's go. And Scott had been having all this ennui for the last year about whether he even liked his job anymore, so clearly this is, like, an enticing offer for him. And he says, "I'll think about it after Millie and I talk," basically. So then we get the epilogue, and Scott and Millie go see the piece of property that the team has, like, set out for her on the compound, and they both are really into it, and they kinda talk about the future, and he asks her to marry him, and she says yes, and he jokes that they can have a double wedding with her Aunt May and the chief, who also got engaged after he woke up from his coma, and she's like, "I would actually love that." And that's the end, and it's very cute.
it is sweet.
So, yeah, gosh, a lot of intrigue, a lot of excitement, a lot of things exploding. Uh Villains I didn't see coming, some I did, some I didn't, some that ended up being connected to things, some that didn't. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, there's lots of moving parts, and I think that's the one thing about any kind of like suspense thrillery books. Like there's moving parts, and it's like the way, like there has to be some skill there, and like laying out the
Yeah,
breadcrumbs so that you don't know too much too soon.
yeah,
But yeah, it was fun. It was a fun ride.
very fun. So anybody who's interested in this book, I would definitely recommend this entire series. I know Marielle has also read the first book in the series.
Hmm.
It's got a heroine who's escaped from a cult and is like on the run, and an undercover hero who's playing her next door neighbor, basically, like trying to get information. and it's really fun too. And of course, Wolfe has his own book, which is also great. So yeah, definitely recommend those. And thanks everybody for hanging out with us in March, and we've got more to come next month.
See you then.